Hello, and welcome to the YouTube channel No Bruises on the Outside. I'm Roger Reynolds, and this will be an introduction a bit more about myself. So, I grew up on a farm in southwest Wisconsin near the Mississippi River. We're going to come back to that. So, what do I like to do now in life? I enjoy nature. Here I am sitting in nature. I like hiking. I like bicycling. I like kayaking. I like just hanging out by a campfire with friends or hanging out myself by a campfire. I enjoy fire a lot, which we'll talk about that another time too. So I also like gardening. I like foraging, which is a little bit between the outdoors and gardening. So foraging is eating wild plants from like the blackberries that are blooming right behind me to picking mushrooms to picking other wild plants to eat. And then I also like gardening. I've been gardening since I was a little kid. I like sustainable gardening now and organic gardening and have been done some teaching of that. Of course, there's bugs here, and I might have to brush a couple away. Organic gardening, sustainable gardening, and that's something that I really enjoy. Edible landscaping, which is have working to make a food garden attractive and ornamental or beautiful. Those are some of my enjoyments. I like cooking. I like going to theater and dance performances. I like just hanging out with friends and talking. I like talking about nature, gardening, goofy stuff, comedy, laughing, improv, but I also like talking about deep stuff, which is mostly what you're going to see here. But I'm also going to talk about some of the fun, happy things that bring joy to my life, also. So that's a little bit about me now. So let's back up. Like I said, I grew up on a farm in southwest Wisconsin, a 120-acre dairy farm, about a mile and a half from the Mississippi River, up on the bluffs, up on the ridge. And farm people in the Midwest, there's Midwest nice, and we think of people on farms are often hardworking, kind of salt of the earth people. And the farm that I grew up in has been in my family for more than 100 years. It was in my father's family, it was in his mother's family for many generations. And all of these generations were hardworking people. But there's more to that story. They were absolutely hardworking people. They could be kind, they could be loving, many of them were, but there was also domestic violence, alcoholism, undiagnosed mental illness, child abuse, child neglect, and animal abuse. There was also stalking and death threats and suicides, to name some of them. And that's what this channel is about, because growing up with that and growing up with that generation after generation, those traumas in my life had an effect on me. It had a really severe effect on me. My father, I knew, so this was going on all of my life. So it just was life. And it was going on for generations. So people didn't point it out as something unusual. My father, by the time I was in my teens, I knew that he was an alcoholic and I knew he had a rage problem or a violence problem. Usually there was very little physical abuse, but there was a lot of what I call no contact physical abuse, where there's physical violence, throwing things, breaking things, punching things, but actually not hitting people. It's still pretty scary. By the time I was a teenager, I knew that he was violent and an alcoholic. And I knew my mother had to be handled carefully. She was pretty fragile. I describe it as she was like walking on an emotional cliff most of the time, and you had to be really careful to not upset her, or you didn't know if she would fall or jump. And that brings me to the main focus of this YouTube channel, is what some of you may know as people know about PTSD, but they don't all know about complex PTSD. So another piece of my adult life was in my teenage years. I knew my father was an alcoholic, but I was actually having mental illness symptoms. I didn't know it because it was just my life. And my family, one of the things, this public facade of being nice and kind and loving, good family, was a public facade. The private reality was very different. So I was trained to put on a public face and not expose a lot of things that I knew were going on under the surface. Well, that happened for me personally also because my mental health symptoms, I hid them. And it wasn't allowed to talk about them anyway. One time, I did talk to our family minister about thinking about suicide, and he told me, oh, everybody thinks about that. And that was it. I didn't talk about it more. And that was someone outside the family. I knew to not talk about it inside the family. I was born in 1968. In 1961, my mom's brother died by suicide at 19 or 20. I was born in 1968. When I'm 2.5, 1970, my mom's mom dies by suicide. And then jump forward 30 years, in 20 some years, in 1997, my mom's dad dies by suicide at age 75. Now, a lot of that wasn't talked about. Actually, none of it was talked about. I was into my teens before I knew that my grandma and uncle died by suicide. So there was a lot of stuff going on that was not talked about. And that has an effect on a child, and it had an effect on me as a teenager. So I mentioned that in my teenage years, I had some fairly severe mental health, mental illness symptoms happening, but I wasn't talking to anybody about them. I didn't talk to people about thinking about killing myself. And I didn't talk to them much about my dad being an alcoholic. I didn't talk to them about how fragile my mom was, and you had to be really careful around her. So that leads me to complex PTSD, which I will do another video, and the link will be below as soon as I get it produced, about what exactly is complex PTSD. But PTSD, when we hear it, we think of flashbacks and nightmares. Those are two of the symptoms that can be part of PTSD, but there are 15 more common symptoms used for diagnosis. So there's a little bit about me. I'm going to get into lots of complex PTSD, the symptoms, assessing, all of that in this. But I wanted to have you just a little bit of glimpse of me, both present and my past growing up. And thank you. And I hope that you get information from here that's helpful to you. And that's why I'm telling these stories, is because abuse lives in silence. Survivors suffer in silence. And the more that we can talk about what's really happening for people, the more that the people who have suffered in silence may know that there's hope for them too. Thank you.